Welcome to the Mel Show. So this show is about Jackie Robinson and how he changed America for the better. And for the first time, we're actually having a guest. Mr. Martin Edelman, who was a lawyer for Robinson after Robinson retired from baseball. And I have a little gift for you, Mr. Edelman. From New York, they have a Jackie Robinson exhibit in the dugout, and I paid retail for that, by the way.
That's great. Thank you.
You're welcome. So before we talk about Jackie Robinson, I have to give a bit of introduction, a background of our guest. Mr. Edelman, you are a very successful lawyer, a graduate of Princeton and Columbia Law School. You travel all over the U.S. and the world and doing complex business transactions. You're in the board of directors of many companies. There's a whole list here of his companies, you know, his resume and everything. Okay. And, but also, you do a lot of public service. You served in Vietnam. You're on the board of directors of many nonprofits, such as the Intrepid Fallen Heroes Fund, and you help war veterans and families. You've been recognized by the U.S. Army for your work with military families. You were awarded the Army Public Service Award. You do special things for our country. And you are deeply involved with the Jackie Robinson Foundation, which you helped create from day one. And Jackie Robinson called you his friend in his autobiography of Jackie Robinson, Never Had It Made. And in a TV interview, Rachel Robinson said that you were her best friend for many years. So welcome to my show.
Thank you.
So, Marty, you know, please begin by telling us a bit about the importance of Jackie Robinson in our country, in our history, as an athlete, as a fighter for civil rights, and tell us a bit about the mission of the Jackie Robinson Foundation. That's a long sentence, I know.
Right.
But
a couple of different parts of it. So maybe we'll start with the foundation and work backwards. When Jack died, Rachel and I and her brother and a friend actually sat down one day and said, how could we best commemorate his life? I mean, it was such an extraordinary life. He had contributed so much to America. How could we take his legacy and actually have it have an impact? And he was really fierce in his view that you only measure life by whether it has an impact on other lives. And so for us, the opportunity to have a foundation which helped youngsters go to college. So college was the mark for us. It was, you know, how kids from struggling backgrounds at that time, 1972, which is when Jack died and we started the foundation. America was still grappling, as it still is, but grappling even more with the conditions for black youth. And so we decided to address that issue. So we started a foundation for the purpose of creating scholarships for kids who were not athletes, because the athletes managed to find opportunities to go to college, but there were so many other kids who didn't. And so we created a foundation which has been awarded many prizes for the fact that it's the most effective foundation in terms of achieving its purpose. So our purpose is to award scholarships to young black Americans who can go through 4 years of college and graduate having learned not just about thinking and careers, but about life itself. So we have an active mentoring program that helps them get ready and equips them for the world in which they're going to live. And of all the foundations that provide scholarships, the Jackie Robinson Foundation has the highest graduation rate of any other foundation. It's literally 100%, but it fluctuates between 98 and 99% of the people who enter our program graduate and get jobs. So we help them get jobs, and we now have a huge alumni group that actually has their own scholarship for young people coming in. So it's we felt we needed to create something that could be sort of a living example of who Jackie was. And I think we've been largely successful in achieving that.
Congratulations on that.
It's a good feeling. Every year we have a weekend in March in which all the kids come in. And we have special sessions for them about preparing for the next phase of their lives. And we have a big dinner. And we honor someone who helps us raise money. And we get to see all these wonderful kids together. And we have about 60 a year in the program. So over the years, we've had quite a lot.
Yeah, I couldn't help but think about when Robinson was at UCLA. He had a terrific career in athletics, but he quit. He didn't graduate. He wrote that I didn't think no matter what education I had, I could get a job.
Yeah.
Contrast that with what you're telling me.
Right. And I think for athletes in that era, that was true. Because everything was limited, whether you were an athlete or a non-athlete. Even for athletes, it was limited. I mean, look, Jackie was the first black American to play a major league sport. I mean, looking back, it's inconceivable today to actually believe that happened, but it did. You know, and Jackie was Jackie was the first in many things that people don't really recognize. The movie, I think, shows the story of the time that he wouldn't sit in the back of the bus when he was in the military, and how he was court-martialed. And obviously they withdrew that. But
was that in the movie?
Yeah. So there was a scene in the movie about it. So he was extraordinary. His ability to look at America and see the way it needed to be changed and be the agent of that change. And you look back at the fact that, you know, his mom was a sharecropper's wife. She picked up the entire family and left and moved to Los Angeles. You know, so there's a history of courageous conduct by members of the family. His brother, Mac, was second to Jesse Owens in the '36 Olympics. So, I mean, just all the way along, he was an extraordinary guy that came from an extraordinary family.
He was very brave.
Yeah, and then when you add that to the selection that he and Rachel had of each other, and again, so the movie is very authentic in portraying the incredible strengths of both of them.
So Marty, you were Robinson's business lawyer after he retired. And I read, you know, you're mentioned in several biographies, okay? And I remember reading, you said, to take it back a long time, you said your first encounter with Robinson, how kind he was.
Yeah, so I had just gotten out of the Army, and I was drafted after law school, and I just got out of the Army, and I went to work. And that first day, the assignment I got was to go up to Freedom National Bank, which was the largest black-owned bank in the country at the time. And I was supposed to sort of record the minutes of that meeting because one of the partners in the firm I worked at was the lawyer for the bank. So I went up to 125th Street and I walked into the meeting room and I sat down. I hadn't looked up. And all of a sudden I heard his voice, and he had a very high-pitched voice, very distinctive. And so when I looked up, I sort of said to myself, oh, wow. That's Jackie Robinson. So I took the minutes, and it was in December. And so when it was over, the Freedom National Bank was above the Apollo. And so I went downstairs, and it was about 7 o'clock at night, so it was dark. I was trying to decide whether to take the subway or try to get a cab, or, you know, I was kind of just sort of standing on the corner. And all of a sudden this very large hand came around my shoulder. Jackie had enormous hands. And I could hear that high-pitched voice even today. And he said, "I bet you'd like a ride downtown." And so we drove downtown and we started talking. And he was telling me that Governor Rockefeller had asked him to start a housing company to develop subsidized housing. And he was trying to think about it, and he had to go to some meetings. And he said, "You know, would you like to be my lawyer?" And I said, "You know, I have to tell you something." I said, "I've been practicing law for about 8 hours."
You have a license?
Oh, yeah. I had passed the bar and everything, so
Okay.
I had done that before I got drafted. And I said, "I've been practicing law for 8 hours." And he said something like, "Well, that's 2 hours more than I've been thinking about being a housing developer." So he just changed my career. Just all of a sudden, I had a career. Representing him was, of course, a very prestigious opportunity for someone who was just starting a legal career.
So what do you think what did he see in you, do you think, that
Maybe I was just the only one who was in the car at the time. I don't know. I don't know. We just had a conversation. I think with Jackie, he had an instinct about people, and you either got past the test in 30 minutes or you never got past the test. He was actually, you know, an incredibly warm and compassionate human being, and he was an enormously wonderful friend.
Robinson was involved in the construction of moderate housing, the Jackie Robinson Construction Company.
Right.
So what were his objectives in forming that company? Can you tell us about some of the successes and challenges that he experienced?
And the purpose really for him was that it was important for black people to own businesses, not just work for businesses. He was a fiercely independent spirit, and he always had this sense of what black people needed to do to move to the next level. Even his being a so-called Republican was a reflection of the fact that he would not allow himself or his people to be taken for granted. And so starting to be a housing developer was unique at the time. And if he could lend his prestige and his intellect and his ability to talk to people and communicate his views to this building project, and also be a profitable enterprise for the family and potentially a legacy for the family, he was determined to do it. So it was motivated by that, I think, so many things in his life. He wanted to accomplish that, but he wanted to accomplish that for a variety of reasons, one of which was for black people to stand up, and others, you know, other reasons were for his family and for his ability to function at a very high level in everything he did. I mean, people don't really, I think they do today, but I think at the time, you know, there are people who viewed him as an athlete, and he was so much more than an athlete. I mean, in addition to his prodigious impact on the civil rights movement, he was a smart businessman. He was a great friend. He was funny. He was spirited, and I just think people, you know, saw pieces of him and not how extraordinary he was as a total person.
Well, I remember when I was a kid watching him on Happy Felton's Knothole Gang, okay? I watched how he talked to children. There's a kind of sweetness about him, you know, no matter whether black or white. He was such an unusual man, you know? So,
I mean, and he used to tell these wonderful stories. I don't know where we were once. We had gone to Youngstown, Ohio, and we were getting off the plane, and there was a crowd at the airport to see him, just because people heard he was coming. and as people were getting his autograph and stuff, and he was just very patient about that, particularly with young people. There was an older woman and a little boy that were standing in line, and she said, "Are you with Mr. Robinson?" I said, "Yeah." And she said, I came here from, I don't know, a town. I said, "How far away is that?" She said, 3 hours. And I said, "Well, why did you do that?" And she said, "I wanted my grandson to meet him." So his sort of his spirit was so important for black people in America to feel good about themselves and to feel that they were not, condemned to being second-class citizens.
I was fascinated with him growing up. Every game I watched or went to, my eyes were glued on him.
Yeah.
Seeing him playing, and I'll never forget when he was on TV. He was on Eleanor Roosevelt's show about, Youth Wants to Know, and he just blurted things. He would blurt things out about the Yankees not having any black players.
Right.
They don't want any. He was very straightforward.
He was. I mean, if you read Arnold Rampersand's book about him, which is sort of the definitive work from the academic sense, people saw him differently. Some people saw him as an angry person, but they equated determination with anger, and they equated with describing life in America as it actually was, as opposed to wanting to hear something a little nicer about it. So, I think it's really, he was focused on the reality that he saw and how to change that. And it wasn't that he was uncompromising, it was that he was not willing to call something in a way that it wasn't. So if the Yankees didn't have any black players, it didn't take, from his point of view, it wasn't courageous to say they didn't have any black players because it was a fact. Now, at the time, it was courageous in addition to that, but for him, it was a way of imposing a sense of reality and purpose on the consciousness of America. So he knew what he was saying.
Yes. I want to read you something. I think it's an incredible, I'm sure you heard it before. It's from an epilogue to his book.
Yeah.
It's pretty famous. He said, "That is why I have devoted and dedicated my life to service. I don't like to be in debt. And I owe. Some of my friends tell me I've paid the note 1,000-fold, but I still feel I owe. Till every man can rent and lease and buy according to his money and his desires, till every child can have an equal opportunity in youth and manhood, until hunger is not only immoral, but illegal, until hatred is recognized as a disease, a scourge, an epidemic, and treated as such, until racism and sexism and narcotics are conquered, until every man can vote and any man can be elected to any office he qualifies. Till that day, Jackie Robinson and no one else can say he hasn't made."
Right.
That's an incredible statement.
It was a sense that he was, in a way, a surrogate who had been fortunate in being able to take advantage of his talent, and that there were so many who had that talent who never got the chance to take advantage of it. And he was very conscious of that. And Rachel has always been a huge proponent of sort of speaking that truth about America, even as America has sort of created a legal structure that's more fair for black people, even as voting patterns have been better, although lately maybe not so good, even as Obama became president. She has always spoken out with that same forcefulness, that same dignified truth-telling, that you can say what you want to say, but this is what it is. and very much intent on wanting people to experience that feeling of what it's like to be black in America, what it was like then and what it is like now. So I think, there are a lot of challenges left. I don't think there are easy answers for any of them, but Jackie's legacy and the principles that Jackie and Rachel have really espoused for their whole lives, and that, if you stand up and talk about it and not be afraid to talk about it, eventually people have to listen. And once they start listening, then you can start to have the debates that you need to come to some conclusions.
It reminds me of a story that Jackie Robinson wrote in his book. At the '64 convention, he was defending, he was for Rockefeller,
Right.
and he was very vocal about it. A lot of the Goldwater people were yelling at him and screaming at him. And he wrote in the book, he said, "Now I know how a Jew felt during the Holocaust."
Right.
I thought it was an extraordinary thing to put in that book.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Robinson had a very deep, close relationship with Martin Luther King, which he died before you
Yeah.
met him. And he wrote that he considered Martin Luther King as the greatest civil rights leader in the history of mankind. He wrote that in a letter to him.
Yeah.
I think he was, too. Did Robinson ever share with you any stories or experiences about his relationship with Martin Luther King and that we should know about? Or?
Well, I think a lot of it's documented. The Robinsons had a jazz concert every year at their home that benefited the civil rights movement and all the great jazz artists, from Dizzy Gillespie to Thelonious Monk to Ella Fitzgerald, and they all came, and Dr. King came to some of them early on, not obviously when I knew him, but he really felt that Dr. King had an instinctive ability to understand how courageous you would have to be to change America, that America could only be changed by what he called a kind of tolerance and patience and love. And I think that had a profound impact on Jack, who was actually more aggressive in a way. I mean, Dr. King turned out to be incredibly aggressive in the ambitions that he had, that he was able to fulfill by not being aggressive, but by actually being passive about hate and violence. But I think Jack saw in him the quality of thinking and inspiration and leadership that was probably didn't exist anywhere ever. I mean, if you look at what Dr. King established, and maybe look at the movies about Gandhi or something, but it was the same, it was the same ability to actually take nonviolence and make it an agent of change, which is not easy in a world that was violently opposed to the movement for equality.
You mentioned Gandhi. I had to laugh because Churchill couldn't stand Gandhi.
Yeah, right.
Because he had so much power with the nonviolence. It's amazing. Right. So I remember when I was a kid, I was so impressed with Robinson because he was involved with the National Conference of Christians and Jews. Mm-hmm. Okay, and I think in the early '50s he went around the country speaking about racism and anti-Semitism. And to me, Robinson, like in '47 when he came up, he hit a chord with not only black people but Jewish people. Asian people, they had very limited opportunities, Italians, everybody was like a little, a groove, and you didn't come out of it. So, people should understand today what he did, the changes he started,
Right.
which eventually led to the '64 Civil Rights Act. So my last question is, Robinson's famous quote, "Our life is not important except in the impact it has on others." And you've been talking about the Jackie Robinson Foundation. Maybe you want to talk a little more about it. As far as what are the expectations of students for service? I think I read that someplace.
Yeah, so we have a part of the program, when they come in, they have to adopt a service element to their college careers. And we expect them, and they come every year back for these weekends that we have. And we have these what we call family sessions, in which different facilitators have 15 or 20 students in the class and talk about issues they've had that come up and how the foundation can help them with problems that develop. We have a hotline that they can call 24 hours a day. And part of it is, like, how are you giving back? I mean, you have this extraordinary opportunity to go to the college that you might not have been able to go to except for the foundation scholarship. And we expect you to have a way of giving back, not to us, but to the world in which you live. And so most of the Jackie Robinson scholars, I mean, basically all of them, have to have a kind of service program, not just for 2 weeks during their college career, but consistently throughout the career. And we expect that of them. And our Alumni Association, actually, one of the characteristics of that group is they've continued that habit in different ways of making service a part of their lives. And if everybody did that, you can imagine what kind of different world we'd have today.
It'd certainly be a different world. Well, Marty, thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
It was a great pleasure meeting you. And shalom, by the way.
Thank you.
Yes, Jack is